She stood on the side of a quiet road in Turkey, wearing a long white wedding dress, with her thumb out, hoping for a ride. Her name was Pippa Bacca. She wasn't running from anything. She was walking toward peace. She believed that if you trusted people, really trusted them, they would show you kindness. So she hitchhiked across countries, dressed as a bride, to spread that message. She filmed her journey. She smiled with strangers. She kept going, even when she was tired. Her dress got dirty, her feet were sore, but her heart stayed full of hope. Then one day, the messages stopped. The videos stopped. Pippa went silent. Days passed. Her friend waited. Her family begged for answers. Then the worst news came. Pippa had been found in a shallow grave. She had been hurt and killed. The white dress that once meant peace was now torn and buried in the dirt. Her journey ended, but the world couldn't forget her. This is the story of Pippa Bacca. Welcome to the Crime Series. Before we begin, do us a quick favor. Drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. We want to know where you're tuning in from, because these stories matter everywhere. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. In the heart of northern Italy, in a city long known for its art, fashion, and history, a young woman named Giuseppina Pasqualino di Marineo, better known to the world as Pippa Bacca, was born into a world. Milan, where she was raised, had always been a crossroads of cultures and ideas, a city where tradition blended seamlessly with the avant-garde. And it was in this creative landscape that Pippa developed a deep reverence for beauty, expression, and human connection. Her parents, Mr. Guido Pasqualino di Marineo and Mrs. Elena Manzoni dei Conti di Chiosca e Poggiolo, were both contemporary but still quite reserved as Catholics. Hence, they supported their third daughter very much. Born in 1974, Pippa was more than just an artist. She was a granddaughter of nobility and the niece of renowned Italian conceptual painter Piero Manzoni. Art was not a distant or academic pursuit in her family. It was the very language of their household. But Pippa's expression took a different path. While her uncle had famously turned everyday items into artistic statements, such as canned works and monochrome canvases, Pippa's focus was intensely human. She was drawn to the power of presence, of gestures, of vulnerability, and of shared experience. She pursued art not merely as a medium for aesthetics, but as a living, breathing way of connecting with the world around her. Her projects often blurred the line between life and performance. In one earlier piece, she dyed her hair green and walked barefoot through the streets of Milan, embodying a forest spirit among urban steel. Her art was not confined to galleries. It was woven into the fabric of the streets, the people, the moment. But it wasn't until 2008 that her most ambitious project would come to life. It would be a journey, one of faith, of trust, and of artistic conviction. Titled Brides on Tour, it was a collaborative performance that spoke deeply to Pippa's artistic values and personal beliefs. Alongside fellow Milanese artist Silvia Moro, she would embark on a journey from Italy to Jerusalem, hitchhiking the entire way while dressed in white bridal gowns. The wedding dresses, symbolic of peace, purity, and trust, were intentionally chosen. The duo carried no luggage beyond their attire, some essential supplies, and video equipment to document their progress. Their belief was that openness and goodwill could disarm strangers, and in doing so, reveal the kindest aspects of humanity. The concept was radical, not because it sought shock value, but because it embraced vulnerability as a strength. Pippa believed that placing oneself in the care of strangers, especially across borders and cultures, often misunderstood or misrepresented, could forge a different kind of dialogue. One beyond words, one grounded in presence and humility. She believed that being dressed as brides would emphasize a message of harmony, transcending religion, nationality, and politics. They weren't just traveling across countries, they were stitching together continents with symbolic white thread. Pippa once said she believed in marriage between peoples. For her, the white dress did not signify a wedding ceremony, but a symbolic commitment to peace and solidarity with strangers she had never met. There was beauty in the simplicity of it. Two women in white, standing on the side of unfamiliar roads, thumbs out, smiling, hopeful. It was this simple yet profound image that would capture the attention of artists, critics, and followers alike. As preparations for the journey began, the idea gained traction both in the local art scene and among the international community. Galleries, institutions, and artists began following the story, many eager to see where it would lead. Pippa and Sylvia planned to document their journey through photos and video clips, updating supporters as they moved through different countries. Each new stop would be a layer added to their evolving canvas. Places they had never been, languages they did not speak, but always met with the intention to connect. On March 8, 2008, the world observed International Women's Day, with rallies, art, and statements of unity. For Pippa Baca and her travel companion, Sylvia Morrow, that day marked something far more personal and profound. It was not simply the launch of a performance piece. It was a quiet act of faith in the idea that peace could be lived, not just discussed. Dressed in flowing white wedding gowns and carrying little more than a camera, notebooks, and unwavering belief, Pippa Baca and Sylvia Morrow stepped out of Milan on March 8, 2008, the day the world celebrated International Women's Day. But for them, this wasn't just a symbolic start date. It was a personal statement. Their journey was a performance, a pilgrimage, and a protest all at once. They were not just walking across borders. They were walking into strangers' lives with open hearts and an act of radical trust. With their thumbs extended toward the horizon, they began their brides-on-tour journey. Two women in wedding dresses hitchhiking from Italy to Jerusalem. The image alone raised eyebrows. Elegant gowns now frayed by the wind, long trains brushing against roadside gravel, white veils catching rays of sun as they waved down cars. Some thought it eccentric. Others found it profound. But for Pippa and Sylvia, the symbolism was clear. From the beginning, the project was designed to strip away control and comfort. As hitchhikers, they placed themselves in a position of intentional dependence. No planned rides, no backup cars, no security detail. Just two women trusting that kindness would outweigh cruelty, that strangers could become hosts, and that art could open doors where politics could not. This wasn't just performance. It was a direct challenge to the fear and suspicion that often surrounds the other. Their first stops were in Slovenia and Croatia, regions still marked by memories of conflict from the Yugoslav wars, but also rich with culture and history. The contrast was striking. Two Italian women, dressed in bridal gowns, walking through landscapes still recovering from war, trauma, and nationalism. And yet what they found there wasn't hostility. It was curiosity. People stared naturally. Children pointed. Drivers slowed down. But most reactions were not of alarm. They were of wonder. Many stopped to ask questions. Who are you? Why the dresses? Are you getting married? And each time, the women answered with warmth, explaining that this was a performance for peace, a way to connect with others through honesty, symbolism, and simplicity. Their presence invited interaction. In Croatia, an older couple pulled over and, after hearing their story, invited them home for dinner. That evening turned into an impromptu gathering, with neighbors joining in to hear their purpose. Pippa and Sylvia explained their goal not in political terms, but in personal ones. They wanted to meet the world as brides of peace, hoping to create a different kind of union, one born of goodwill. That night, the couple's young daughter made a paper veil of her own, inspired by the women at the table. Photos were taken. Tears were shed. A connection was made. At border checkpoints, officers initially treated them with suspicion. Unusual outfits, no luggage, strange explanations. But as their stories circulated in local media, the barriers softened. Drivers began recognizing them from newspapers or TV. Some pulled over not just to offer rides, but to bring gifts, homemade food, small crafts, or simply words of encouragement. In each country, their white dresses became more than fabric. They became living canvases, worn and stained by rain, dust, and experience. They told stories without words. As the journey continued into Bosnia and Herzegovina, the symbolism deepened. In a region still marked by visible scars of war, bullet holes in buildings, cemeteries dotting the hills, The image of two brides walking for peace was jarring, yet powerful. One teacher invited them into a school, where they spoke to children through translators. Despite the language gap, their message landed. The children smiled, some asked to wear the veils. For Pippa and Sylvia, this was the heart of the project. Not performances on stage, but real moments of human exchange. No lights, no scripts, just two women walking through countries with open palms and silent courage, trusting in strangers and in the message stitched into their dresses. Every day was unpredictable. Some days brought long walks under hot sun, shoes worn thin, backs sore from carrying cameras and tripods. Other days brought spontaneous kindness, an extra sandwich, a bed for the night, or a stranger pulling over just to say, "Thank you for what you're doing." By the time they reached the edges of the Balkans, their gowns were no longer pristine. The hems were frayed, the lace was stained. But those imperfections were the point. Each tear, each smudge of dirt was a mark of the road, a memory from a stranger, a trace of the journey's soul. The white dress had started as a blank symbol. Now it was full of stories. And in that simple act, standing on the side of unfamiliar roads in a wedding gown, hand extended not in marriage but in hope, Pippa and Sylvia had already begun to change the way people saw each other. They weren't just hitchhiking. They were inviting the world to believe again. By the time Pippa Baca and Sylvia Moro crossed into Serbia and Bulgaria, their performance had transformed into something much larger than they had anticipated. What began as a symbolic act of peace, two women hitchhiking across borders in wedding dresses, had become a moving, real-time dialogue between strangers. Word had started to spread. Their images appeared in regional newspapers, brief TV segments, and even online blogs run by local travelers and artists. Drivers would occasionally pull over, not just out of curiosity, but because they recognized them. They'd say, "We saw you on the news," or "You're the brides traveling for peace, right?" In small towns and rural villages, people welcomed them not as tourists, but as messengers carrying something hopeful through places still healing from history. The white gowns, originally meant to symbolize trust and purity, took on more meaning with every dusty road and border crossing. They were no longer just part of a costume. They had become living artifacts, marked by the dust of highways, stains from rainstorms, and wrinkles from long hours of walking. Each crease and smudge told a story of where they had been and who they had met. Gifts were modest but deeply meaningful. In one village, a grandmother handed them a small embroidered cloth, telling them it had belonged to her mother and was meant to protect travelers. In another, they were reportedly given fresh bread and fruit, with a note tucked inside. "May your path always be safe." These tokens weren't just hospitality. They were acts of solidarity, gestures of warmth from people who understood in their own way what the journey meant. Every step of the way, they documented their evolving experience. They carried video cameras, still cameras, and notebooks, treating the journey itself as an unfolding performance piece. Pippa, often behind the camera, had an eye not just for landscapes, but for moments of human intimacy. She filmed the way light bounced off church windows in the late afternoon. She took photos of children waving from balconies, of men helping them carry their bags through muddy roads, of brief smiles exchanged with market vendors. There was a simplicity to these exchanges, but also a quiet power. The journey was changing shape, no longer just an artistic message, but a shared human story unfolding step by step. For those who met them, even briefly, Pippa and Sylvia were a reminder that strangers could still be trusted, that peace wasn't only a word written on banners, but something that could be walked, offered, and received. Their journey through Serbia and Bulgaria was a vital part of the soul of the project, a chapter where the symbolic became real and the personal became collective. As Pippa Baca and Sylvia Moro crossed the border into Turkey, the energy of their journey began to change. Up until that point, much of their route had taken them through the Balkans, places still healing from the scars of past wars, where the presence of two women in bridal gowns sparked curiosity, kindness, and thoughtful conversation. But Turkey held a different kind of weight. It wasn't just a geographical stop, it was a threshold, a place where Europe met Asia, where ancient history blended with the modern world, and where diverse religions, traditions, and tensions coexisted in vibrant contradiction. For Pippa, reaching Turkey wasn't just progress on a map, it was spiritual. She had long seen this country as the symbolic beginning of the deeper part of their pilgrimage. Jerusalem, their ultimate destination, was now within reach, but so too were the cultural complexities that she wanted their performance to touch. Turkey was a place of bridges, between continents, between belief systems, between identity and change. It was exactly the kind of place their Project Brides on Tour was designed for, a space where openness, peace, and human connection could speak louder than language. Their arrival in Istanbul marked a turning point. The city, sprawling and chaotic, welcomed them with its layers of color, sound, and spirit. They marveled at the skyline pierced by minarets, wandered through bustling bazaars, and stood silently in the majestic expanse of the Hagia Sophia, letting centuries of faith and history wash over them. Every corner of Istanbul seemed to pulse with stories, some ancient, some modern, all alive. They took photographs, recorded video diaries, and wrote reflections on the merging of East and West, of old and new, of performance and real life. Despite their physical fatigue, miles of walking, riding in trucks and cars, sleeping on floors or couches offered by strangers, their emotional energy remained high. In email updates to friends and supporters, Pippa expressed how much she was learning from the road. "The world gives so much when you meet it with trust," she wrote in one of her messages. "Even when we're tired, it gives more than it takes." It was during this time in Istanbul that they made the decision that would change everything: to temporarily separate and continue the journey solo, planning to reunite later in Beirut before entering Syria together. The idea wasn't new. They had split briefly before, in Slovenia and again in Bosnia, to pursue independent interactions, exploring how people responded to a single bride versus a pair. Those earlier separations had gone smoothly and had added layers of richness to their documentation. Before we continue, if you've made it this far into the story, take a moment to pause and reflect. Pippa Bacca and Silvia Moro weren't just traveling. They were carrying a message about trust, peace, and the power of human connection. And right here, as they part ways in Turkey, that message becomes even more vulnerable and more urgent. If you believe stories like this matter, if you want to help keep their voices alive, please like this video to support content that shares real, meaningful stories. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of this powerful journey. Comment below. What would you have done in Pippa's shoes? Would you have taken that road alone? Now let's return to the story. Their reasoning was rooted in both artistic vision and practicality. Traveling separately allowed them to cover more ground, meet different people, and generate a wider variety of responses and footage. As performance artists, their goal was not to provoke but to observe, to place themselves into unfamiliar spaces and allow meaning to emerge naturally. Each solo stretch was a deliberate act of vulnerability, of trust in strangers and in the road itself. Pippa, who had always embraced the idea of being present in uncertainty, welcomed the solo leg. She intended to continue hitchhiking through eastern Turkey, moving toward the Syrian border, capturing stories and reactions along the way. She still wore her white wedding dress, now frayed and travel-worn, but still symbolic. She carried only essential items: her camera equipment, a notebook, basic hygiene supplies, and some cash. Her plan was to document every step just as she had from the beginning. Sylvia took a different route, heading southeast as well, but through different towns. They kept in touch as much as they could, coordinating their eventual reunion through text messages and email. Their separation was meant to last only a few days. No one could have known that Pippa would never make it to their next meeting point. At the time, there was no reason for alarm. Both women had faced small risks before: confusion at border crossings, long waits for rides, awkward language barriers, but nothing had shaken their belief in the goodness of people. They had been shown hospitality across several countries by families who didn't share their language, by drivers who offered food and water, and by children who asked to try on their veils. For Pippa especially, every moment of trust fulfilled felt like proof that her mission was working. As she left Istanbul and headed toward the Kocaeli province, she remained committed to that belief. Gebze, a fast-growing town near industrial routes, was one of the places she passed through, a brief stop on a long road. On March 31st, as Pippa stood along a road in the town of Gebze, she waited for a ride. By then, she had grown comfortable with the rhythms of the journey. An exchange of eye contact, a wave of the hand, a brief conversation, and then the continuation of the road. Gebze was a modest-sized town in the Kocaeli province of Turkey, approximately an hour's drive southeast of Istanbul. Known more for its industrial infrastructure than for tourism, Gebze stood along a major transportation corridor connecting Istanbul to the rest of the country. For most travelers, it was a brief stop en route to other destinations. But for Pippa, who had spent weeks documenting her journey through the Balkans, every town, no matter how nondescript, was part of a broader canvas of human experience. That morning had been unremarkable. She had communicated with family and project contacts in prior days, her messages carrying the same tone of calm determination she had held since Milan. Her notes reflected optimism, noting the warmth of people she had met and her excitement at nearing the Middle East, where her symbolic performance would take on added cultural and spiritual resonance. She had crossed multiple borders, made meaningful connections, and relied on dozens of strangers, all without major incident. But something was different this time. After that day, communication with Pippa ceased. The phone calls stopped. No more updates came in. The footage she had so meticulously gathered was no longer being uploaded or shared. When Pippa Baka stopped responding to messages on March 31, 2008, the day she was last seen in Gebze, Turkey, there was no immediate sense of panic. She was used to long stretches without signal. Hitchhiking through unfamiliar lands, armed only with a camera, a notebook, and trust, came with its share of unpredictability. Communication gaps were part of the journey. She had sent her last known message just days earlier. Her tone was calm, reflective, and full of hope. She spoke of how much the road was teaching her, how every act of kindness, every small conversation with a stranger was adding to the meaning of her art. The project, Brides on Tour, had been her dream, a symbolic walk for peace and trust across borders, dressed in white, relying entirely on strangers, and until that point it had gone beautifully. So when the messages stopped, no one assumed the worst. Her family thought she might be in a remote village with poor reception. Her travel partner, Silvia Moro, assumed Pippa was just running late. After all, they had temporarily separated, intentionally, agreeing to reunite later along the route. It wasn't the first time they'd taken different paths to explore individual artistic interactions before meeting up again. But this time was different. Pippa never arrived. As the hours passed, uncertainty grew. By the third day, April 3, Silvia had waited long enough. She was standing at their agreed meeting point in Beirut, watching the hours tick by with no sign of Pippa. She tried calling again and again. Nothing. Her calls went straight to voicemail. That day, Silvia contacted the Italian consulate in Istanbul and filed an official missing person report. The moment she did, the nature of Pippa's journey shifted, from a hopeful performance to an international emergency. The search began. Within 24 hours, Italian and Turkish authorities were on alert. Embassies and consulates were notified. Police forces along the highways and in the surrounding towns of Gebze began their search. Volunteers joined the effort. Everyone had the same question: where is the woman in the wedding dress? The image of Pippa, walking with flowing white fabric against the gray of rural roads, had already been shared in local media during her earlier stops. But now, it took on new urgency. Her photo appeared in newspapers, on missing person posters, and in TV reports. Have you seen her? Did you pick her up? Did she pass through this village? People who had shared tea with her, offered her a ride, or hosted her in previous towns came forward with memories. They described her smile, her calm voice, the way she explained her mission, to show that peace could be lived, not just preached. Many cried on camera. No one could imagine that anything had gone wrong. But the silence remained. Back in Milan, Pippa's family launched their own campaign for answers. Her mother, father, siblings, and friends issued public pleas, appealing not only to governments but to ordinary citizens who might have encountered her on the road. Social media, still in its earlier stages in 2008, became a tool for amplifying awareness. Her image spread quickly across borders, shared by travelers, journalists, and members of the art community. What had begun as an intimate, symbolic journey was now the center of an urgent international search. As days passed, the trail began to cool. Police turned their full attention to Gebze, a sprawling industrial town about 50 kilometers southeast of Istanbul. This was the last place where Pippa Baka had been confirmed alive. She had reportedly used her bank card there on March 31st. And activity from her SIM card had also been registered in the area. Investigators began retracing her known steps, combing through hours of surveillance footage and questioning residents, drivers, and local business owners. At a gas station near the main road, security footage revealed a haunting image. Pippa, still wearing her white wedding dress, stood talking to a man by the fuel pumps. She appeared calm, perhaps asking for directions or a ride. Her camera bag was slung across her shoulder, and she held a small notebook in her hand, likely used for documenting her artistic journey. A few eyewitnesses remembered seeing her that day. One vendor described her as quiet, polite, but noted that people were confused by her attire. Still, no one imagined that within hours she would vanish without a trace. With mounting urgency, authorities expanded the investigation, focusing on digital clues. The key breakthrough came from Pippa's mobile phone. Her SIM card had been removed and used in a different handset shortly after she disappeared. Turkish police tracked the call logs and traced one number in particular, dialed from her SIM, to a man named Murd3red, a 33-year-old resident of Gebze. He had a minor criminal record, including a history of theft and an earlier fatal car accident, and lived in a modest home near the outskirts of town. Karatash was quickly taken in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he had no idea who Pippa was, and insisted he had found the phone on the side of the road. But as investigators pressed him and cross-referenced his statements with phone tower pings and witness reports, his story began to unravel. He grew nervous. Inconsistencies emerged. Under growing pressure, he finally confessed. On March 31st, Karatash admitted he had picked up Pippa while she was hitchhiking out of Gebze. He drove her toward a remote forested area not far from his home. There, in the woods, he sexually assaulted her and then strangled her to death. He told police he had panicked afterward, dug a shallow grave under dry leaves, and buried her body. On April 11, 2008, 11 days after she went missing, Karatash led police to the location, a wooded area outside Gebze, not far from the highways she had hoped would take her toward the Middle East. The scene was chilling. Beneath a bed of leaves and broken branches, officers unearthed Pippa's body. Her wedding dress, once a bright symbol of peace and vulnerability, was torn and soiled, yet still visibly wrapped around her remains. Her camera, notebook, and personal items were missing. The grave was shallow, hastily dug, and offered little protection from the elements. Forensic specialists were called in immediately. Their examination confirmed what the confession had revealed. Pippa had been sexually assaulted, and the cause of death was manual strangulation. There were signs she had fought back. Defensive wounds on her hands, but she had ultimately been overpowered. The post-mortem also helped confirm the approximate time of death, just hours after she had been picked up on the road. The news shattered her family. In Milan, her mother Elena and her sisters, who had clung to hope for 11 agonizing days, received the official confirmation with heavy hearts. Her father, Guido Pasqualino di Marineo, released a quiet statement expressing grief, but also emphasizing that her daughter's faith in peace and humanity should not be forgotten. That same day, news agencies around the world broke the story. Italian artist found murdered in Turkey. The reaction was immediate and devastating. In Italy, the headlines screamed with disbelief. La Repubblica, Corriere della Sera, and La Stampa featured full-page spreads on Pippa, now remembered not only as an artist but as a symbol of silenced innocence. TV channels showed her earlier footage, laughing, walking in white, speaking about peace as the newscasters reported on the shallow grave. Viewers wept. Public figures spoke out. Vigils were organized in cities across Italy. Church bells rang in her hometown. In Turkey, the shock was just as profound. Many citizens had followed Pippa's journey with admiration. She had been welcomed in towns and villages across the Balkans and Anatolia. The idea that such violence had occurred on Turkish soil sparked national mourning and anger. Turkish officials, including representatives from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, issued statements condemning the crime and offering condolences to her family. Local activists and artists organized memorials in Istanbul, Ankara, and even in Gebze, where citizens laid flowers at the entrance of the forest where she had been found. Back at the crime scene, police recovered more evidence: a discarded shoe, strands of hair, and traces of DNA on tree bark and leaves. All pointed back to Karataş, confirming his confession. The trial of Murat Karataş began in late 2008. Attended closely by the international press, it drew reporters from Italy, Turkey, and beyond. Pippa's family, including her mother Elena and sisters, traveled to Turkey for the proceedings. They were accompanied by Italian diplomats and human rights observers determined to ensure a fair and transparent judicial process. From the outset, it was clear that this trial carried more weight than just a criminal case. It was a test of justice under global scrutiny. Turkish officials faced immense pressure to meet international standards. The Italian government, deeply involved, monitored every session, ensuring that Pippa's family was kept fully informed and protected. Each hearing delivered complex details that were difficult to hear. Evidence was presented in scientific and procedural language, a sharp contrast to the raw reality behind it. The prosecution used phone logs, CCTV footage, and witness accounts from Gebze, painting a timeline of Pippa's last day. Forensic doctors explained the tragic findings: injuries, signs of struggle, and the manner of death, all laid out clinically, yet devastating in impact. Karataş's defense attempted to shift blame. They claimed he was mentally impaired, intoxicated, and unable to fully understand or control his actions on that day. Psychological evaluations were introduced to bolster this stance. However, this strategy faltered in court. The defense portrayed the encounter as consensual. The prosecution countered this with overwhelming evidence: DNA tests that indicated multiple assailants, the rapid removal of Pippa's phone and SIM card, and Karataş's own confession. Witness testimony became the emotional center of the trial. People from Gebze, including gas station attendants and residents, recounted recognizing Pippa in her bridal dress. They described noticing Karataş's distinctive vehicle near her last known location. One witness testified he remembered her saying, "I'm an artist, I'm traveling for peace," before she disappeared. These personal memories, simple yet poignant, contrasted starkly with the brutality of the crime. International interest remained strong. Journalists from La Repubblica, BBC, The New York Times, and others maintained a steady presence. Diplomatic observers and rights organizations ensured that every legal step aligned with observer requirements. Turkish courts, under the watchful eyes of both domestic and foreign media, operated under intense tension. The trial moved quickly, concluding within months. By December 2008, the verdict was delivered. Karataş was convicted of rape and murder, receiving a life sentence, plus additional terms amounting to over 14 years for sexual assault, kidnapping, and theft. The court condemned his lack of remorse, affirming that his claims did not align with the facts of the case. Appeals were swiftly rejected in February 2009, with the appellate court upholding the conviction and rejecting the defense's assertions of diminished responsibility. Through the entire process, Pippa's family remained steadfast. Despite the emotional weight, they were supported by Italian diplomats and Turkish legal advocates who attended every hearing. They witnessed justice formally served, even as they grieved their loss. As many observers noted, legal justice, while necessary, is not always the same as emotional resolution. It does not reverse events, it does not restore what was taken, but it serves as a societal declaration that wrongdoing cannot pass without accountability. Outside the legal system, discussions about the trial took on broader dimensions. Public opinion was divided, not in judgment of the verdict, but in how to interpret its implications. Some questioned whether Pippa's artistic mission had inadvertently exposed her to risk, while others insisted that her right to walk the world in trust was never to blame. They emphasized that the actions of one individual should not be allowed to cast doubt on the values of openness and peace that Pippa represented. In the weeks following the conclusion of the trial, various human rights organizations weighed in with reports and statements. These focused not on the courtroom alone, but on the cultural significance of the case. They addressed the underlying social conditions that allow such incidents to occur and called for greater protections for women and travelers, not just in Turkey, but worldwide. The emphasis was not on assigning national blame, but on cultivating global awareness of the vulnerabilities that some individuals face when crossing borders, both literal and societal. News outlets around the world picked up the story. Italian newspapers ran full-page features on the young artist who had set out to prove the power of kindness, only to meet a cruel end. Turkish media expressed outrage and sorrow, and government officials offered condolences to Pippa's family. Amid the mourning, there were also moments of dignity and collective reflection. On April 19, Pippa's funeral was held in Milan, attended by more than 1,000 people. Family, friends, fellow artists, diplomats, and ordinary citizens who had followed her journey. The church was adorned with green ribbons and accessories, Pippa's favorite color. Outside, mourners laid flowers and messages. Some dressed in white in solidarity, others wore veils, as a gesture of shared grief and remembrance. But the reflections did not stop at the church doors. In the days and weeks that followed, journalists and commentators around the world sought to understand not just what had happened, but why it had struck such a nerve. After all, Pippa's was not the only story of a traveler lost abroad. Something about her mission, the intentional innocence of it, the symbolism of the white dress, and the journey's core belief in kindness, resonated across divides. If this story moved you, if it made you think, reflect, or feel, please consider subscribing to this channel. We tell real stories that matter, stories that reveal the best and the worst of humanity, stories that should never be forgotten. Subscribe for more powerful true stories. Like this video to help more people see Pippa's journey. Comment your thoughts. What did Pippa's story mean to you? And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Together, let's keep her message alive. Thank you for watching. Rest in peace, Pippa.